NASA countdown, sorry.
And now you're live.
All right, well, welcome to the Radaga Initiative webinar here at UCHRI. This is our third in a series of 5 webinars that we will be conducting, it's a chance for us to talk about the nuts and bolts of the proposal process, dialogue about what you're all working on. We're interested in hearing from you in terms of your areas of research, people that you're interested in connecting with around this proposal, and just having a conversation about the issues. So we're going to use a few more webinars to continue having a discussion. I should mention that we are recording these webinars and we will be broadcasting them on our website as well as YouTube and Vimeo sites. So, if you want to share this webinar with some of your faculty members or other graduate students, we would invite you to do that. We will have a few more webinars next week, and they're going to be essentially the same material, at least the first 15 minutes or so, where I give the sort of nuts and bolts information about the proposal process. But then they will vary in terms of the content. We're going to have a couple of guest moderators next week. You see faculty members who will be moderating it. I know that they have particular issues that they want to talk about, and as various people kind of log in and out of the webinars, that will change the dynamic, if you will. So maybe what we'll do is I'm going to outline briefly what the hour or so looks like, and then you can introduce yourself and we can introduce ourselves to you, if that sounds good.
Okay.
I'm going to just do a 15-minute or so PowerPoint presentation on the initiative, just giving a little bit of background and really focusing on the nuts and bolts of developing a proposal and collaborating with other people around this. I will hand the webinar over to Associate Director at UCHRI, Jennifer Langdon, who has a few things she wants to share in terms of digital humanities projects to share that might be helpful in thinking about developing a proposal for Radaga, and just to have a kind of conversation about what you're working on and some proposal ideas. Are there any technical issues? Do you have any questions that I can answer before we introduce ourselves?
No, everything seems to be working fine. You froze for a minute, but I seem to be able to hear most of what you're saying.
Okay, am I moving again?
Yeah.
Okay, great. And that if something comes up, feel free to use also the chat feature along the left side of the screen, which I can read, especially as I'm going through the PowerPoint. If it gets stuck, that would be
okay.
Helpful to know. How about we'll introduce ourselves and then we'll hand it over to you. My name is Kelly Brown and I'm the Research Programs Manager here at UCHRI, and Religions and Diaspora and Global Affairs is one of my programs that I'm working on.
All right, good.
Hi, I'm Jennifer Langdon. I'm the Associate Director at UCHRI, and this initiative, I was co-writer on the grant proposal to Luz Foundation for this initiative. And so I'm very excited to be working with Kelly and rolling this out and connecting it up with real people, moving from theory to practice.
Yeah, good.
Great. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. My name is Brent Crossan. I'm a doctoral candidate at UC Santa Cruz, and I work in cultural anthropology. And I was really excited to hear about this initiative. I just heard about it a few days ago, and because I work with diasporic religion in the Caribbean, and so it seemed directly related to my research interests. And specifically, I work with South Asian and African diasporic religious practices in the Caribbean, mostly in Trinidad in the Southern Caribbean. And so I guess, do you want me to say a little bit more about what my research has been about?
Sure.
Okay. I've just finished a year and a half of research in Trinidad on a Fulbright scholarship for my dissertation, and what I'm interested in is basically kind of 2 aspects. One of them is the circulation of religious experts between homelands and diasporas, so basically between India and the Caribbean and between Africa and the Caribbean, and the ways that's affected notions of orthodoxy in Trinidad, and also the line between religion and superstition in Trinidad. And so I'm really interested in what people consider to be superstition, the kind of shifting ways that people consider religious practices that would not fall within the realm of proper religion sometimes. Mm-hmm. And this is often practices of healing or protection or harm, the use of kind of power to heal or to harm or to achieve some effect in the world. And so I'm interested in the constitution of this realm of, I guess you could call it superstition, but it's more often referred to as obia in the Anglophone Caribbean, or science in Trinidad. And I'm interested in the ways that kind of in these practices, the relationships to homelands can get kind of confused, because there's a tendency to really look for, to model religion on its relationship to a homeland origin. And when that kind of process gets frustrated, is oftentimes when people are looking at things that have to do with what's been classified as superstition. And so I look at the ways that people have kind of classified certain practices as both Indian and African at different moments in time, and the ways that kind of relationships to homelands alter when you step outside the realm of what is considered to be proper religious practice. And besides that, I'm also interested in a kind of this imagined form of travel where people travel back to the homelands of Trinidad's diasporic peoples. It's basically Afro-Trinidadian Christians called spiritual Baptists, and they have a blindfolding ritual. They're blindfolded for a period of days, and they're supposed to travel back to Africa, China, or India. So basically the main homelands of Trinidad's diasporic peoples, and they have they're supposed to learn languages, learn the religious practices, learn the customs of these homelands, and then come back and tell about them in church. And so I'm interested in how people imagine homelands and kind of return travel to homelands, but not like physical travel, but just imagine travel.
Right. That's fascinating.
Yeah.
So that's about it.
That sounds really interesting. I'm just curious, how did you find out about the initiative? I'm just kind of curious how the news traveled.
Well, I had heard about it a few months ago, but it hadn't started yet. And then I got an email from, I think it was from the Latin American and Latino Studies listserv.
Okay.
That announced they're having to contact, I guess, you or Nathaniel at UCSC.
Cool.
So yeah, that's how I found out about it.
Great. No, I'm glad to hear that. And as a former slug, I'm glad you're here.
Oh really? Oh, you went to UCSC?
Yeah. I did my doctorate in the literature department.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
Cool.
Very cool. Okay, so maybe I'll take a few moments of your time and we'll kind of run through the PowerPoint, which is really the nuts and bolts. And so I should say before I begin it that all of this information is on the website. It's in the call for proposals. So it gets, in some ways much more detailed online. And, if you have any questions, I'll kind of go through the PowerPoint and feel free to ask me them at the end.
Okay.
And then we'll kind of open it back up to more of a conversation and a dialogue, if that sounds good.
All right. Good.
All right, so let's do this. Okay, so the religions and diaspora and global affairs. This is a 3-year initiative that is run by UCHRI to look at how issues like globalization and immigration have changed the religious landscapes of the United States and California in particular. So with this grant from the Luce Foundation, we will be funding 3 different humanities studios to conduct research over the next 2 years. And right now we're in a planning year. So in the fall, we assembled a working group of which Nathaniel is a member to provide some leadership on the topic, to do some brainstorming around what are some of the emerging issues and interesting kind of content out there right now. And as you know, we're running a webinar series. And this is really an opportunity to discuss the proposal development process if people have questions or want to run ideas by us, and also to connect scholars with one another and with journalists. So we had a webinar a few days ago, moderated by Anjali Shah, who's a journalist for PRI, and she talked about ways in which to work with journalists, and some of the really amazing things that a journalist would bring to a humanities studio and to a proposal. And so we're looking at these webinars as another opportunity to kind of get this conversation going or continue it if it's already started. And lastly, this year we're going to have a studio jam session in February, and this is an opportunity to further support collaboration amongst faculty, graduate students, and journalists, as well as to provide some support around proposal development. We really do want to use this studio jam session as a way to have more sustained conversations around what you all are thinking about, working on, or what you are working on and might want to propose in the process. So what is the Humanities Studio? I'm not sure how familiar you are with it, but we're kind of imagining that the science lab meets the artist studio, and their love child offspring is the humanities studio, right? So it's kind of more than those two parts separately and something very different. But for us, the Humanities Studio is a place where there is a multidisciplinary mix of people, faculty and graduate students, journalists, people in the community, be it artists, activists, community members, religious leaders, etc., where they come together and work on a larger topic. Each studio for us needs to have a core group, and this is where the kind of nitty-gritty of assembling a proposal comes out of. This core group would include a professor who would serve as the PI for the Humanities Studio. The core group would also include a graduate student, an international scholar, and a journalist. And we're going to allow each proposal team to define journalists however they want. It could be, somebody who's doing, community media or blogging, and it could be a reporter for a major news outlet. Depends upon, what project you're working on and who makes the most sense in terms of where you're going with your research. So that's the core team of the studio. But each studio, we imagine, is much, much bigger than just those 4 people, and would pull people in from other disciplines, other professors, other graduate students, as well as other people from the community. And so here's this hypothetical group that I've come up with, right, where additional members would include other professors, a religious leader, a community artist, etc. I included this hypothetical model so I could point out a few things, which is one, there's a range of faculty involved, so it's professors as well as associate professors, so there's kind of a mix of that. We get a range of campuses. Ideally, each proposal we see would have at least 3 UC campuses represented, so there's some geographic diversity represented, as well as a range of disciplines. So you see this one would include, people in literature and sociology and music and anthropology, all kind of working on various projects that meet up under a much larger thematic or guiding question. And lastly, we would imagine that or we think it's very important that there are strong connections to the community, so that people who are working, as community artists or religious leaders or community-based organizations are part of the studio at some point, depending upon what the research looks like. There are lots of other ways, though, that you can involve other people, and something to think about is, how might undergraduate students get involved in a process like this or in a proposal like this? And some things to think about might be, how might undergraduate students, working on independent studies help contribute to the research goals of a proposal? Same thing with undergraduate courses or, community-based projects that undergraduates could be working in with particular faculty members. Likewise, we think there's a real opportunity to involve faculty and graduate students. Creating related working groups, right, that have a combination of faculty and graduate students, seminars, conferences, dissertation working groups. There are lots of ways in which, various populations could be involved in a big studio, just at varying levels and to various degrees. So, and we think that's an exciting part, which is there's a way in which the studio allows multiple different, types of folks to get involved. So each humanities studio, in addition to having this kind of core group and additional members, must produce a public translation component. And this public translation component needs to be suitable for digital dissemination. And there are lots of examples of really interesting public translation components. And I know Jennifer wants to talk about this in a few minutes. So I'm going to go into just one example. Are you familiar with the Haiti Lab at Duke?
Yeah, I think so. Mm-hmm.
Cool. So they just have a project that I find really fascinating, where as part of this larger lab that they did on Haiti, which they were looking at it from multiple different aspects, they were worked with an artist, then collaborated with graduate students and faculty members to create these what I consider pretty amazing works of art. And so I'm just looking at it right here where, they created these works of art and then had corresponding descriptions in terms of, where it came from in terms of the inspiration and what kind of historical documents it's drawing on. And then this is all pretty amazingly, broadcast, if you will, on a website. They also did this in a museum. But there are lots of other examples out there in terms of interesting ways to do public projects that have digital components. Some examples might be, an oral history project or a performance, a community media project, just, projects that essentially help illuminate the group's research regarding its foundational questions. Something that we're really committed to here at UCHRI is collaboration. And so as part of the proposal process, we've built in ways for the 3 funded humanities studio to work with one another. And the reason I mention this now is because as you're putting together a proposal, I think it's important to think about ways in which your funded proposal or your funded studio might connect with other folks out there. One of the ways that we're going to support this collaboration is through a global symposium that we're holding in the fall. And at the Global Symposium, we'll bring the core groups from each of the funded humanities studio to UCHRI for a big conference. We will be inviting the global scholars that you identify in your proposal, as well as your journalists, as well as bringing in some other global scholars that we think could, help enrich the conversation and just kind of participate in a big kind of, group think about these ideas. At the same time, we will be having an intensive residency, and this is an opportunity for your group to not only work with one another, but then to make connections with the other funded humanities studio. And we would imagine that throughout the 2-year process, there will be, many shared webinars and wikis, as well as, utilizing social media for connecting the project. So, that there might be some kind of dialogue, even though each studio is working on its own discrete issue, there might be some kind of dialogue that could connect them, or at least continue throughout the work. So we recognize that this proposal process has many, many, many moving parts, hence the webinars. And I just want to briefly go through a few of them. And again, this info is on the website in the call for proposals. But first, we're looking for narratives, and in the narrative, we want each group to identify the theme around which they're coming together, and and offer a set of foundational questions or problematics that you're going to explore. We'd also like to see a work plan that identifies what the team will be doing for the first 6 months of the project, and then how they anticipate whatever work they're going to do within the first 6 months of the project will lead to future work. I want to stop and mention that this initiative is really about experimentation and collaboration. I mean, that's one of the things that is very exciting about it. We recognize that experimentation and collaboration can lead to very unpredictable outcomes, right? And so, in acknowledging this, that's why we're asking for the first 6 months of what a work plan would look like. Giving people the freedom to change direction. Take a different route, to change direction entirely based upon what the first 6 months results in. Because this is a studio, right? Some things turn out really well, and other things you decide you have to scrap and start over. So we want to support that development process and that experimentation and discovery process, I guess might be a better way of saying it. Lastly, in the narrative, we want the proposal to suggest what kind of projects, the public-facing digital projects, might be outcomes of the research, and explain to us how do these projects help illuminate your research. Why is it important? Why is it the appropriate way to go? All right, second component, to identify the participants. In the proposals, we want to see who the core team is, so the faculty, PI, the graduate participant, the journalist, and the global scholar. And these are people who need to have committed to working in the studio. And we also want to know, what other additional participants would you, and here's where it's okay to propose people that might not necessarily have signed on already. As you come up with this list of additional participants, right, which could span, a religious leader out in the community, an artist, graduate students, undergrads, we want to know how each of them will contribute to the research that the group is going to do. All right, third component, budget. A lot of budget details are in the call for proposal online. I would almost leave it at that. I just want to mention in the budget details online, to look at, there are a few budget caveats regarding administration. And I believe the Dean's office at Santa Cruz allows for an admin line item, but there's some information about in your budget being able to include a line item for administrative costs. So that's something to check out when putting together a budget. And secondly, I would note, and as a graduate student, this would definitely affect you, that RA and GSR costs are limited to 35% of the total budget. So just things to keep in mind as you're putting the budget together. There are a few special conditions for journalists and international scholars that I want to mention, though. UCHRI will pay the journalist involved in the studio directly. Journalists get paid $7,000 for a two-year commitment. So this is something that does not need to be included in the proposal's budget. And secondly, we will be paying for travel and accommodation for each journalist and global scholar that's involved in each studio to come to UCHRI in the fall for that global symposium and the intensive residency. So again, those are costs that don't need to be accounted for in the budget. And again, the fact that, we think it's exciting that, we have some money to pay for, a global scholar to come in and work with you. So that's something that you don't have to worry about in your budget. All right, this is really just the beginning of information overload. There's a lot more on the site, and I know that you've already been to the site because you've registered. However, I want to show you just a few sections to kind of look at. The first is the funding section. And here's where we have the Humanities Studio proposal, which is all of this information and much, much more. There's a letter of interest, and this is if you're interested in attending the Humanities Studio Jam, which I've referenced and I'll talk a little bit about in a minute. If you're interested in attending, there's a letter of interest you need to submit in order to attend. And at UCHRI, we accept all of our applications online via FAST apps, and so here's a link to FAST apps. This is kind of the nitty-gritty of applying for funds. Point out the virtual network, which is growing. There you are. This lists people, right, and interests, and even some keywords. And one of the cool things about it is that this cloud tag over here to the right, so let's say you're interested in issues of ethnography, right? And you can click on that and find other people who have self-identified essentially as working on that particular issue. And again, part of this is, we're interested in getting people to network and to find one another, and to collaborate, right? Lastly, I would just point out the jam session. This is a section of the website that's still developing. We're kind of finalizing some of the details of the jam session. So as we confirm presenters and participants, we'll be updating the section of the website. Okay. A few other funding details, and I'm almost done. Each of the Humanities Studio will receive up to $40,000 a year for 2 years. So math major, it's $80,000 for the 2-year process. Any ladder track UC faculty member can serve as the PI. They do not need to participate in the webinar. They do not need to attend the Humanities Studio Jam, although we would, of course, encourage them to do that. But they can serve as the PI. And our advisory committee, in collaboration with a few UC faculty experts in the field, will be evaluating the proposals. All right, we have a few more webinars to push if you're interested or if you know of anyone who might be interested. We have one on Tuesday from 4 to 5 that will be moderated by Susan Osman, who's a professor of anthropology at UC Riverside. She's also a member of our working group. And then one again on Wednesday from 12 to 1, and that one will be moderated by Jennifer Hughes, who's the Associate Professor of History at UC Riverside. The letter of interest to attend the Humanities Studio Jam is due on the 18th, so a week from today. Wow. Yeah, very soon. And we're going to fund up to 40 people to come to the jam, so we will be paying for travel and accommodations to actually come and to jam with us here at UCHRI. Yeah. Okay, so what is the jam session? We see this as kind of part proposal workshop and part networking opportunity. a chance to meet other people, to talk about projects, but also to learn about the proposal process. So we're going to have a proposal development workshop that is specifically tailored and geared, if you will, towards submitting a proposal for RADAGA. We're going to have a panel of community media representatives and digital humanities scholars who talk about, working with community-based organizations, cool digital humanities products to check out, things of that nature. We're going to have a speed dating opportunity around the issue of religions and diaspora and global affairs. So, if there are individual scholars, let's say, who want to participate in a RADAGA humanities studio but who don't have a team, it'd be an opportunity to kind of meet up with other folks. And also, if you already have a team or part of a team or a whole team, but you're interested in making other connections and collaborating, it'll be an opportunity to kind of branch out and to find those people as well. And we'll have a concluding, interactive talk where we're inviting leaders in the field, people who are doing interesting work on religions and diaspora and issues of international affairs, to come and just have a larger conversation with us, just about, interesting topics, just to have a chance to talk about what drives us. So we have a very fast turnaround time. The proposals for the RADAGA studio are due in April 10th. We will let everyone know of funded studios in early May, and then in fall we will bring everyone to UCHRI for the Global Symposium and for the intensive residency. That's what I have. Are there questions?
Let's see here. I think that you clarified this, but the PI doesn't have to be a full professor. They could be an associate professor, assistant professor.
Yes.
Correct.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, and so the studios would last for 2 years.
2 years. Yeah. Starting in the fall.
Right, and then at the end of that, what would be the dissemination process for what they produce? Would be could be a gallery exhibit or could be online. It's pretty much open in terms of that.
We would want some kind of digital component, so right. Something that we'll be hosting, if you will, on a UCHRI server. But we would encourage the end products to span multiple dimensions, right? So I think a gallery exhibit would be great, right? Yeah. The digital component, I think, is important in terms of a reach. So there's a way in which there can be a reach kind of worldwide. But, and that was one of the things I found interesting about the Haiti lab, right, is that they had the history embedded in amber. They had this artistic process that was kind of, created at the university, that's available online, that was in a museum. So there are multiple ways it was kind of reaching out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great. Let's see. And the global scholar, I have a lot of connections with scholars in the Caribbean, so the global scholar, I assume, would be somebody specifically not within the U.S. or not based within the U.S., or they could be. So one of the things that I think is cool about this grant is that there's money built into the budget to bring somebody from outside the United States. It's expensive, right, to work in person with somebody who's not based in the United States. So we want to encourage people to take advantage of those funds. So if there is somebody who's on the ground, and and it's not just taking advantage of the funds, but it's working with somebody who has expertise that's in the community, if you will. However, that said, if the best scholar for your proposal is working at Yale, then that's the best scholar for your proposal. Right. So it could just be, it could just be somebody at a non-UC institution as well. But we would strongly encourage a kind of global component. Yeah.
Right. I mean, I agree with Kelly here. We are open to, what works for this specific proposal and project, but wow, the opportunity to bring international scholars here to work with people at the UC, I don't know. I would have a hard time passing that. Yeah. And I imagine that, the review committee would share that perspective.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense to me to have somebody that actually is working in the area where you'd be doing, your project, to be involved in it. So. Right. And,
perhaps there is somebody, at Yale or University of Florida or Michigan or whatever who really speaks to the larger issues that you would like to engage with and bring into the collaborative work in a way. But there's $80,000 over 2 years to work with. You can bring this person out, from Michigan for a week for a speaker series that hits 3 different campuses.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And still, so still bring that person into the project, but at the same time have the international scholar and be able to take advantage of that. That would be my argument,
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really exciting, because I'm really for that kind of interaction between scholars outside the U.S. and scholars within the U.S.
Mm-hmm. Right, because there's a different perspective that you get from somebody who's not based in a U.S. institution.
Right.
Yeah.
That is, I think, that I would argue is an important component of Radaga, and certainly something that our funder, Luce, is invested in as well, is that kind of, the other perspective, right, that doesn't come from a U.S. institution.
Yeah. And, so my spiel actually starts out with, sort of I want to talk about how this project came out of UCHRI's priorities, and one of them being, global perspectives, both in the sense of, international or intellectual work, but also in terms of, participation, that, we have a whole, different kinds of funding that enable UC scholars to connect with international scholars. And, that priority is clearly, part of this proposal on religions and diaspora. A couple of the other things that are really priorities here are engaged humanities, connecting, humanities scholarship with, beyond the ivory tower, if you will, both in the sense of broadening audiences for humanities research, being able to connect the research and translate those ideas, beyond conversations amongst ourselves or with our students, but also I think in terms of broadening the participants and thinking about, kind of creatively about knowledge production and who creates knowledge. How can we work together in, sort of interesting collaborative ways to produce new kinds of research and engage different kinds of people in that process. So for us, the Luce Foundation was kind of a godsend, if you pardon the pun, because those things are also very important to them. They're very committed to funding research on, religion in international perspectives, and their other thing is about connecting scholars to journalists. And for me, just me personally, one of my hobby horses is trying to work with humanities scholars to help them translate their research for broader publics. We get trained in ways of writing and ways of thinking that work on the inside circle, but not necessarily outside that. And so, I'm really interested in challenging that and thinking about ways that we can move beyond that. And journalists strike me as a really great way of doing that, because there's interesting common ground, I think, between journalists and academics. Both are interested in, telling stories that illuminate the world that we live in. Both depend on a great deal of research and a variety of sources to tell those stories. But the job of the journalist is to boil all of that information down into a very a relatively pithy, pared down analysis, while academics, scholars, we thrive on nuance and complexity and change over time. And so to put those two perspectives together around these shared issues, I think is going to produce some really interesting work. So I'm excited about this. I think it's
that's really
a
exciting.
neat project.
Yeah.
So the next thing I'd like to just sort of touch on is, Kelly had talked about the 4 required categories of people for that core team, and I do think that that's one of our ways of sort of addressing different. How do I want to say this? Sort of different perspectives. The faculty member will bring something that's different from a graduate student. For journalists, like everybody, brings an important perspective to the process of this. I'm not sure if I'm explaining that really well.
Yeah, no, I understand.
Second time we've done this today. But it's but those in some ways are only just like the categories of people. Right. What's really important, I think, is that the larger that once you've sort of done the check boxes that okay, we've got these people, that there's also a way in which you really focus on bringing in the people, creating the collaboration around what works for the intellectual project. So as we were thinking about how to do this, sort of what's the organic process that creates an interesting, compelling research collaboration. We got a little crazy. We got to role play with, who would we be? Like how would this happen? How would a research collaboration happen? How would it come about? And so we were sort of imagining, like, so who are the scholars that, there are a pair of people, there's a pair of faculty members, who have work at different UC campuses, work in different fields, but they know each other from a conference circuit or something, right? Or know of each other's work just because they read the same journal. Who knows? Anyway, we know each other. Imagine that I am, the professor of media studies, and my thing is women's activism and new media in Arab Spring, and I know Kelly because her work is. I'm an anthropologist, and I'm interested in the, Islamic women in the Bay Area, right? So I'm really connected to the Bay Area community, and I'm interested in the connections between women in the Bay Area community and their homelands, right? But my particular research project is much, much more focused. I'm interested in kind of the inscription on the bodies of, the kind of religious inscription on the body or something like that, something very, very focused, obviously tailored. But we realize that there are these kind of larger connections in terms of gender, the state, and religion, right? That we each kind of have our own particular project, but there are these kind of this big kind of category, right, that we're working under. Right, so we start thinking, okay, so there's definitely something. We've got something here. We've got the beginnings of a proposal. Like, who might we consider including? How could we take this idea and make it kind of more applicable, a little bit broader, while still working on this idea of gender, the state, and religion? Yeah, and sort of think like brainstorming. Who else could we now bring into this, and what sorts of different scholars, as we kind of think about the variety of people that could connect with us around gender, religion, the state. It could move the project in different ways. Right. So if there were somebody working, like a graduate student who's working on diaries, I was just from personal experience, somebody who's working on maybe Irish Catholic immigrant diaries, like looking at women's diaries. So somebody who's really kind of involved in like textual analysis of these diaries that have been written, spanning like, talking about a lot of different issues, right? But there's this way in which it's, the Irish Catholic women coming over during the Great Famine. That would be interesting, right? It would be another way of kind of approaching this idea of gender, state, and religion. But so this is a perspective that then would broaden outside Middle East and Islamic focus, and bring a different religion into the mix, a different diasporic process. Alternatively, another way to go might be to keep the focus on the Middle East and Islam, but broaden the gender perspective. For example, we know somebody who's working on masculinity and representations of Arab masculinity, from the perspective of, Middle Eastern culture producers versus American, and representations of resistance on the one hand and terrorism on the other. Okay, so that takes our project now into a really interesting and different direction, but still enables us to work together and bring other people in. So I'm still working on my project. I'm still working on the diaries of Irish Catholic women immigrants.
but I also have this much larger kind of
Yeah.
scope or
Right.
lens through which I'm looking at it.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think, kind of the point that we wanted to be sure got across was that, this initiative enables people hopefully to, continue to work on their individual projects, but to put together a larger research collaboration that enables, one sort of bigger meta level questions and themes to be addressed.
Mhm.
And also puts people together in different, kinds of unexpected juxtapositions that will push your work in ways that you might not get if, you're only working with other cultural anthropologists.
Yeah.
You're only working with other people
Or only working on the Caribbean, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Right.
so
Exactly.
because there's a way in which what you're working on will really kind of inspire somebody who's working on an issue from a totally different kind of geographical perspective, and we're interested in seeing, in the spirit of collaboration and experimentation, where that might lead.
Right. No, that's great. Yeah, and I can see your rationale behind calling the meeting a jam session.
Yay! All right, cool. You get it.
On
you get
it.
it.
On it. Great.
Right. Yeah. Trying to improvising and seeing
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah, and just riffing off one another and just kind of seeing where it goes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly. Before we end this thing, I do want to talk about, I have like 4 different digital projects that I just want to share with you, and kind of, just to give you a sense of what some of the possibilities are. But I actually think maybe we could spend some time, depending on what time it is right now.
2:41.
Oh, fabulous. In talking about engaging, graduate students engaging with the initiative. The last webinar we did, this morning, had 2 graduate students in it. And, sort of one of the things that came up was, sort of, I think, a conversation around how graduate students can engage, in building collaborations, that that this shouldn't necessarily be a trickle down process, but to encourage you, as you clearly are, in being proactive and kind of thinking about how your project could fit with other other scholars' work, but as in the interim between 10 o'clock and 2 o'clock, I also started thinking about the ways in which I think part of the graduate student engagement in the proposal process needs to be kind of, thinking about how graduate students engage in this work. Does that make sense? Am I
Can you talk a little bit more about?
Well, so that there could be multiple ways of graduate students working. There's a way in which, if you read I think the call for proposals, it sort of structurally suggests that there are 2 roles for graduate students, that there's one core participant and, and then there's, the potential for a GSR. And I guess I'm sort of thinking about, some graduate student perspective in the process of thinking about, like, what would be useful as a graduate participant in this kind of research initiative? What could you do as part of a 2-year humanities studio that would further your work, and as well as the work of the group? So just kind of being able to think creatively about what do you need? Does that, kind of, is it a dissertation group? Is it a working group? Is it?
Well, yeah. I mean, I guess in terms of my interests, like in terms of disseminating knowledge beyond the academy, I'm interested in documentary film. Something that with that I haven't necessarily had the time to pursue, and they also closed down the social documentation media lab here, so there's not.
Are you kidding?
I think last year for the budget cuts, so there's not as many facilities to do it. So it would be great to have some resources to do that, and also I'm interested in publishing and kind of more popular for, especially within the Caribbean. Magazines. There's something called the Trinidad and Tobago Review that I like to publish something in, or to do something in more popular for, especially within the Caribbean. Those are just two things that I could think of as being something that could come out of this project. Yeah, particularly if I had more time to kind of devote to something like that. And that could be, I mean, that would probably be somewhat different than my dissertation, I'd imagine, although it would probably be related to it,
Yeah.
See, I think that's really interesting, and an important way to approach this. That terrific. This is you're engaged in this project on some level because of your dissertation research, but it's also, I think, just the very emphasis on engaged humanities, on connecting to the public, enables you to kind of think a little bit outside the box about how your research and your work can be shaped in different ways for different audiences through the project.
Yeah. So I don't know if that's what you're getting at, or if in terms of possible participation. I guess you also talked about the difference between a core participant and the GSR. So there's basically two different roles.
Well, and so, but actually, what I'm saying is that there should be more. That those should not be the only two roles. I think.
Oh, I see.
There should be a recognition that graduate students could participate in a whole variety of ways in this. That
that this isn't just a faculty-driven initiative, right? So that, and I think that's one of the really good things about having a graduate student as a necessary component of the core group, is that in some ways that your voice is in the proposal, right? It better be in the proposal, and so you can start thinking about, so even just fellow graduate students that or have had visited conferences with, what are some of the issues you're exploring? It sounds like you're interested in like, even in terms of professional development, right? So publishing, right? So like having access to these other publications, and the kind of process that's involved in that. I mean, it would be interesting to think about that as being an outcome, if you will, of the studio that you're working on, in terms of helping graduate students, whether it's to have the access to the filmmaking studio, to have some kind of assistance with that. I mean, I don't know if it's that, like an internship per se, but, some kind of development help with that. So that there's a way in which, like, that's a fundamental component of it. And you also then have all these various graduate students that are probably trickled throughout the state, who are then participating. But, maybe it's just a 6-month thing that they're participating in virtually, or maybe it's bringing everybody together once to do this, work in the studio. I mean, I don't know, I don't know what it could look like. But I think that there's a way in which, if you want it, and if the faculty member you're working with is open to it, and I think it's built into the grant that they have to be, that there could be some really interesting ways that this money is spent to support research and people doing the research.
Right.
Yeah.
And and that's sort of why building in the into the core team, people with multiple perspectives, coming from very different, sort of subject positions, if you will. So a journalist is going to bring something very different in terms of how to structure some of the engagements, and might be someone that could help think about what are the professional development and writing opportunities for graduate students and faculty. Different ways of disseminating your academic work. Other publishing outlets, blogs. Who knows? I think that there are a lot of possibilities. But in putting those different kinds of people together, we're really. I'm hoping that something really creative and interesting comes out of this. And I just want to encourage you to run with that.
Yeah.
Make it.
Yeah. I'm just excited about meeting people from different UC campuses too, because. Well, especially because I work in the Caribbean at UC Santa Cruz, there's not many people that work in the Caribbean, so I've had to be interdisciplinary. But there's people that work at like UCLA that I would love to kind of connect with, and that work in Caribbean religion, and so I'm excited about trying to make some connections across campuses as well. And it's really exciting that you're trying to foster that
Yeah.
Yeah, and I would encourage you in the next few days, if I don't know if you know these people or just know of them, but to contact them.
Yeah,
And
I've met
I
them at
think
conferences, so.
this is a lot of money. Like there's a fair amount of money associated with this. So in some ways that's one of the ways to kind of sell this, but I think it allows for some really interesting collaborations. So I mean, I would just encourage you to contact them and to let them, to let them know what's going on and see if they have any interest in it.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
But as a way of thinking about, what you're interested in, right?
So I'm just kind of curious, as you think about engaging in this initiative, um, are there ways that you're imagining the broader framing for your project that could connect, people from different perspectives?
Yeah, I think one way is kind of in line with what I talked about in terms of imagined travel, imagined returns to homelands. That could be an overarching theme that could link different diasporas. I mean, obviously in California, there's not a huge Caribbean diaspora, but that might be able to link, people from different diasporas in terms of how they kind of imagine their connections to homelands. If perhaps they don't, they might have never even returned to these places.
Right.
Because there's been a lot of recent focus on return travel, kind of heritage tourism, very, kind of people in diasporas going back to their homelands and the way that changes their perspective on their own identities. But there could also be a focus on people that may not actually physically travel back to their homelands, but the way that they imagine connections to a homeland and how they describe that process. And so I think like the narratives of people that I work with, and they're imagining traveling to China or traveling to Africa, and the experiences that they have, there could be some kind of film or auditory aspect of them narrating these journeys, and then perhaps there could be other ways to do that with other diasporic communities. So that's just one idea off the top of my head that I
like it. I think it sounds great.
It's just off the top of my head. I'm sure I could, after I think about it a little bit more, I could
come
up with some other stuff. But yeah.
Cool.
So I mean, that would be one exciting thing that I could think of.
Great, I love it. So we have 6 minutes left, so I just want to sort of run quickly through these 4 websites, which is just kind of a way of, sparking your imagination on what I think some of the interesting possibilities, sort of recent projects I've seen around digital humanities, the kinds of things, different people are doing. So this first one is, this is a project out of University of Southern California that's headed by Diane Winston, who is a communications scholar, and this is actually part of a Luce Foundation funded initiative. And what I really liked about this project was that it's linked to a graduate seminar in which the graduate students are looking at the effect of caste and religion on South Asian culture and society in India and in Southern California. And part of the class involved, I believe, traveling to India and doing interviews with people, doing interviews in California, both print interviews, video interviews, which are up on this website. And there is, there are blog posts. And it just struck me as this, really terrific way to, sort of bring this intensive research and engagement into a very readable and I think kind of visually clear digital project. I also want to show you Hypercities. This is a project out of UCLA run by Todd Presner, and oh, bigger. Okay, and it's a pretty interesting project. I wanted to highlight this one because it's a mapping project, and I think a lot of the interesting digital humanities work that's happening right now has really relied on different kinds of mapping projects. And the thing I think is interesting about this one is they look at different cities and use layers of historical maps so that you can explore a city over time through the maps of the city itself. Now, one of the things I think this is super trick in terms of its sort of the technology involved in this, and they've clearly got some very advanced programmers working on this. But what I liked about this is that particularly this there's a Hypercities Los Angeles part of this that is set up in a way that enables community members or people outside the university, anybody, to add material to the map of Los Angeles. One of the projects is on the history of Filipino Town, and there are spaces that allow people to add their own oral histories, put in memories of a specific building or restaurant or church in that area. And so I thought I like that as an opportunity to sort of get some community generated content that exists side by side with the oh my god, I'm reading this from the website, community generated content side by side with scholarly produced research data. So I really did like that one. Restore Restory is another mapping project, but it's much more accessible, I think, technologically. I imagine this is something that the initiative could produce without a great deal of developer help. And this is a project that looks at the Cache Creek Nature Preserve, which is right outside the Davis, and uses the site as sort of a lens to look at the land and its history from a whole variety of perspectives. And it involves audio and video interviews with a range of different people involved in, they've got agriculture, farmers and ranchers and, tribal leaders, and all sorts of interesting ways of, sort of looking at this site from a cultural history perspective, from an environmental history perspective. And so I thought that, was kind of a neat way to think about how one could tell a story of multiple perspectives. And then the last one, I'm feeling really, no, that's not, oh, wait, I went someplace else after showing this last one. So hang on one second. This is this Gulag site. This one I think is really interesting on a number of different levels. Not only for its content, which I'll talk about in just one sec, but this is a collaboration between a museum in Russia, the National Park Service, the Center for History and New Media at George Mason University, and a Russian Studies Center at Harvard. So wow. I thought this was actually really cool as, kind of a way of thinking about how one might partner, with different kinds of organizations around, sort of a research or intellectual interest. And there's some really amazing stuff on here. And I thought about this actually when you were talking about an exhibit. So I just want to click here on this. They've got a featured exhibit here that, okay, so this is not enabled QuickTime Player. Anyway, if you go onto this on your own time, there are video interviews with people who experienced or worked in gulags. There are opportunities for scholarly interpretations of these experiences. There's a whole documentary archive that involves textual documents, but also there's a lot of art, drawings, photographs. It's another one of these, there are lots of different layers of sources and stories and ideas. And again, this is, it's a really nice, clean site, and it's I imagine, pretty easy to build this kind of thing. And there's also a curriculum. You know, so there are just like all of these different levels on which the history of the Gulag has become, you know, a window onto cool stuff. So, so hopefully that sparks your imagination.
Yeah, no, it's really great. And there's actually a professor in our department who's really interested in virtual ethnography. And the Gulag project reminds me of some of the things that she showed me.
Great.
In terms of multimedia ways of telling people stories. So it's exciting. Yeah.
Susan, in the literature department, I imagine you work with Susan.
Sorry, you broke up there for a second. What did you say?
Sorry. Do you work with Susan? Why am I blanking on her last name? It's been a long week. I apologize. Susan in the literature department who works on Caribbean.
No, I actually haven't worked with her, but I have her book, Blood Talk.
Okay.
Right, but I haven't actually worked with her. But actually, that'd be a great connection to try to make.
She knows a lot of people. And I know that she's worked with one of my friends who got their doctorate in literature from Santa Cruz, who worked on Caribbean literature.
Right.
And and again, lots of journals. I would talk to Susan just to see if she'd pick her brain in terms of as you're thinking about this project, who else you might connect with, and feel free. She knows me. Feel free to, if you want to mention my name, that I told you to connect with her. But she might be a good resource just to think about it.
Yeah, no, that sounds great. It sounds great. There's also some people at in Santa Barbara that I thought about in the religious studies department. Like Roberto Strongman. I don't know if he's a part of this at all, but
I believe he submitted a proposal for a Caribbean studies something or other a while back. So yeah, you're right. There are a lot of people at Santa Barbara that I think might be interested in this. So
and I mentioned that there are quite a few people from Santa Barbara on our working group who are members of our working group that we have listed on the website. And these are people who, because of their affiliation with the working group, are happy to kind of field requests for information. So I would also, their information is on the website too under working group. There might be some other, people to contact, as you're thinking about it.
Yeah, that sounds great. No, this is really exciting. And I think this really gives me a better idea about what you're looking for. And I can kind of sink my teeth into what a project might look like with this. So
great.
It's really exciting. Yeah.
Cool. All right.
Thank you so much for joining in.
Yeah, this is fun.
Yeah, thanks.
Hope to see you.
Have a good weekend.
Yeah, you too.
Yeah, hope to see you. Yeah, hope to see you there. Okay.
All right. Take care.
Bye.
Okay, bye.